Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to the FSC APAC EUDR webinar, Navigating Your Compliance Journey in the Asia Pacific. I am Michelle Wong, Deputy Regional Director of FSC APAC. Today, we aim to clarify the roadmap for you, especially for those of you who are FSC cert holders in the supply chains related to the EU market. For those who have been following EUDR, we know that EUDR is challenging, with many new requirements and uncertainties, including how to implement them, and more recently, discussions about potential delays. Despite these uncertainties, our goal today is to help you move forward in understanding EUDR better. We believe that clearer requirements around sustainability and legality will become the norm in the future, aligning with the global trend of meeting higher sustainability standards to mitigate climate change. To achieve that, we have dedicated a program today and invited experts to share their insights with us. Together, the program will last for 3.5 hours, but stay with us because all this information is very important to us. I myself will first provide a high-level recap of what the EUDR is, with the purpose of understanding your role in the supply chain and navigating your compliance journey in the EUDR-ready market. We have invited 2 CB certification bodies to share their insights on FSC-aligned certification for EUDR, an innovation designed to enhance your readiness to the EU markets. Ms. Xinxin Zhang from Preferred by Nature will help us understand the requirements of the regulatory module, while Mr. Ken Law from SGS Hong Kong will further share advice on preparing for the regulatory module's audit. After digesting the technicalities of the regulatory module and its preparation process, we will listen to experience of the adopters. Mr. Sean Nyquist from FSC International will summarize the experiences of regulatory module early adopters. And then Mr. Keelong Foo and Jerry Foo from Tat Win Latex company, who have already gained the regulatory claim, will share their first-hand feedback. Please feel free to grab a coffee or tea before listening to Mr. Dinda Trisnadi from FSC International, who will lead an important yet not easy section on risk assessment. This section is particularly relevant to you if you are currently or will be sourcing from standard or high-risk countries, such as Indonesia and Malaysia in APAC, as defined by the EU in May of this year. Finally, don't miss the last but not least section. Mr. Andrew Williams from FSC International will conduct a live demonstration of FSC Trace, the blockchain technology that everyone should seriously consider for collecting and passing on information to fulfill the EUDR due diligence statement requirements. Before we start the webinar, I think we should first address the news about potential EUDR delay. In the recent webinar hosted by FSC International just last week, a speaker coming from EU Commission clarified that the EU Commission just sent this letter to the Parliament and the Council for consultation. So the conclusion for today is EUDR is not postponed. Any change requires agreements with the EU Parliament and Council. So without further ado, let me start the first part of this section. In the registration form for this webinar, we collected initial feedback about your roles in the supply chain and your expectation for today's section. There are actually a lot of requests for clarification on your roles and responsibilities, particularly focusing on the question, what should I do? So today, many of these questions will be addressed during the webinar. For the outstanding ones, we will do our best to provide answers after the webinar. Now, let's have a quick recap of EUDR and gain an understanding of how EUDR relates to your specific roles, guiding you towards answering the question of what should I do next? First of all, we must understand that EUDR is an EU law, but it has global impacts. From the APAC perspective, if you are trading with the EU, you are directly hit, even if you claim that you are not trading with the EU. As upstream suppliers in the same supply chains, you should not stay out of responsibilities, as the entire chain will face the same challenges in maintaining your businesses with EU buyers. So FSC, on the other hand, is an international NGO with the mission to protect the world's forests, while EUDR is creating an unprecedented impact on forest supply chains. FSC is also committed to updating and advancing our tools and solutions to meet EUDR requirements and the global demand for EUDR-ready products. For FSC, we see around 9,000 certificate holders who are affected by this regulation either directly or indirectly within the EU. However, when you look outside the EU, say, APAC, the impact is even greater, around 21,000 for a total of 30,000 potentially impact. So in short, the EU wants to increase the demand for deforestation-free and legal products. This is an EU law aimed at minimizing EU's contribution to deforestation and degradation, as the union's consumption and production of the 6 respective commodities are expected to lead to approximately 248,000 hectares of deforestation annually by 2030. So how can this be achieved? That's why the EUDR has a sharp focus on requesting traceable supply chains. So according to Bloomberg News, wood and natural rubber are the 2 most economically important commodities in the EU, and they are also the main focus covered by FSC. So in terms of EUDR due diligence requirements, this simple graphic conveys very basic but important message. Please be patient with me. Before zooming in your specific role, I think we all should understand these principles, which will facilitate our work afterwards. The left-hand side focuses on products, while the right-hand side focuses on companies. First, according to EUDR Article 3, products must be deforestation and degradation free. They must be produced in accordance with relevant legislation. These are the principles, no matter what, we need to remember. Importantly, products must also be covered by a due diligence statement with details described in EUDR Annex 2. On the right-hand side regarding companies, it states that companies or the whole supply chain actually must conduct due diligence. This is a responsibility we are talking about, which includes gathering information, assessing risks based on the information collected, and if any non-negligible risks are identified, mitigate them. In terms of due diligence statement, I would encourage you to really take a look at Annex 2, because this indicates clearly the information required, which include, for example, product HS codes, species information, countries of production, geolocation of all plots of lands, and date or time of harvest, etc. Filling a due diligence statement is the step that an EU operator company must take before placing the product or exporting the product on or from EU market. For all other requirements, such as information collection, risk assessment, and mitigation, all work should be completed and documents must be kept for 5 years and provided upon request for inspection. The good news is Article 13 states that companies should not be required to fulfill the obligation of risk assessment and mitigation if all your relevant commodities and products are produced only in low-risk countries. So, as you might be aware of, 140 countries were classified as low risk by the EU Commission in May of this year. The underlined countries are those with FSC presence in APAC. To be clear, in terms of APAC supply chains, only if you are currently sourcing from, for example, Indonesia and Malaysia or Myanmar, which is less likely to happen, I believe, does your company need to fulfill due diligence. Otherwise, you only need to focus on Article 9, which is information collection. So go back to this image. Despite this good news about sourcing from low-risk countries, upon request by the EU authorities, companies should still provide relevant documents to demonstrate that, remember the principle, that there is no risk of mixing with products of unknown origin or those from high-risk or standard-risk countries. Then the question is, how would I know whether there's any risk of mixing in my supply chain if I don't need to conduct risk assessment, right? If I'm sourcing from low-risk countries, I don't need to conduct risk assessment. How can I know there's a risk of mixing? So the reason behind is that the information required by Article 9 is actually more than what is listed in Annex 2. That means, in addition to all the information listed in Annex 2, which I briefly explained, that Article 9 on information collection indicates that companies should also collect conclusive and verifiable information to demonstrate that the products are deforestation-free and legally produced. What I want to emphasize is that it is the company's responsibility to ensure the principles on the left-hand side are upheld. Even though companies sourcing from low-risk countries only need to gather information, they must also be able to prove upon request or inspection that there's no risk of mixing with products that are illegally produced or sourced from deforestation or degradation. You might then ask, how can I do that? That is why FSC introduced the FSC Aligned Certification powered by the Regulatory Module, which will be explained in detail by other speakers to support your compliance journey if you are sourcing from low-risk countries. So let's return to the question, what should I do? We mentioned that EU operators who place the product on EU market or exporting them from EU market should submit a due diligence statement with the information listed in Annex 2. But how does we always call due diligence statement looks like, and how to submit that? According to Article 4, bracket 2, the due diligence statement is actually created via a electronic information system, which we also call it EU Traces dashboard. So after submitting the information on EU Traces, EU operator companies will receive a due diligence reference number, DD due diligence reference number, for placing the product on EU market before shipment. So for those who are asking how to submit a DD statement, I would encourage you to visit the EU website. I will provide the link when you receive the PowerPoint, and join their tutorial training and watch their tutorial videos for details. Our speaker, Andrew, will also explain how FSC Trace would pass on information to EU, EU Traces for submitting due diligence statement. So after understanding the principles and the overall due diligence requirements, let's zoom in to your roles in the supply chain. Again, please remember that EUDR is an EU law aimed at reducing the EU contribution to deforestation and degradation. That said, EU operators based in the EU are the ones who should exercise their due diligence obligation regarding information collection, risk assessment, and mitigation. Having said that, in order to facilitate EU operators in receiving all the relevant information, the whole supply chain, even based in APAC, should collaborate. That's why when we keep talking about EUDR, different solutions, different tools, we must remember the whole exercise is all about supply chain engagement. We all need to talk to each other, share information, pass on risk assessment, collaborate, unless we will miss the EU market. So what I want to say is, for example, some of you might be representing FM, forest management. Then FM cert holders are responsible for collecting geolocation and other product information down to the plots of land. Then, for example, level 4 or level 5 suppliers, depending on your commodities, such as sawmills, should conduct risk assessment related to source materials and harvesting sites with FM because you are closer to the forest. Then levels 1 to 4 suppliers, such as processors and manufacturers, you should pass on information to the APAC exporters, including big retailers in APAC who are trading with the EU operators. As noted in the questionnaires in the registration form, many of you, even though based in APAC, are currently supporting your buying units, the BU, based in the EU. That means, as I highlighted with a red arrow for the downstream players, even though you are not technically responsible for submitting the EUDR due diligence statement, you are indeed playing a very important role in the due diligence work to support your EU buying unit. I hope you are clear about that. So let's talk about where do you source your material from. If your company or supply chain is sourcing only from low-risk countries, congratulations, as we just mentioned, only information collection is needed and no risk assessment is needed, as FSC certified forest meets most of EUDR requirements. And thus, FSC Trace, powered by blockchain technology, becomes the useful tool to help you submit information all the way to EU traces and generate the due diligence statement. However, if your company or supply chain is sourcing from standard or high-risk countries such as Indonesia or Malaysia in APAC, you will also need to conduct risk assessment and mitigation. Risk assessment and risk mitigation. So depending on whether you are sourcing certified materials, FSC 100, FSC mix, or control wood, the work that you need to do may differ. And we will cover that later in the risk assessment section led by Dinda. And then risk assessment should be conducted by level 4 and 5 suppliers closer to the forest, and then pass the risk assessment and mitigation work downstream to your downstream players for supporting the EU operator due diligence requirements. With that, Dinda from FSCI will tell you more about that. Okay, so to put everything into one flow chart, to sum up, the compliance journey for sourcing from low-risk countries is the easiest because you only need to meet Article 9 requirement in collecting information. And then if you consider using FSC Trace, which is voluntary, not compulsory, it's the technology to help you submit information to EU traces. However, if you are sourcing from standard or high-risk countries, you also need to conduct risk assessment and risk mitigation. Nevertheless, sourcing FSC certified materials, including all FSC 100 materials or natural rubber, because natural rubber are seen as FSC 100 materials. The process is comparatively easy in terms of risk assessment, as FSC certified materials meet all EUDR requirements except one indicator regarding whether the product's origin involve any armed conflict or having wars. But that is easy to solve, right? You can check the news and clarify whether the location has war happening or not. As such, there is almost nothing to do, as FSC simplified risk assessment template provide all the positive answers for you already. But finally, FSC's updated risk assessment, which is like a guidebook or manual, which aligns with EUDR's new requirement, will be a super useful tool to support your risk assessment work. If you are sourcing FSC mixed materials or control wood materials, from standard risk or high risk country. Again, Dinda will tell you more about that in his session. So to summarize again, there are various scenarios simplifying your compliance journey. They include either sourcing from low-risk country, easy, or sourcing FSC certified materials or FSC 100 materials, because the simplified template provide all answers for you already. And also, stay tuned for FSC's updated risk assessment, which already aligns with EUDR and also will provide a lot of useful guidance for you to meet the risk assessment requirement. As mentioned in previous slides, demonstrating a company's due diligence to collect all the requested information, including risk assessment and risk mitigation, could be challenging, especially if you are APAC exporters operating in a long and complicated supply chain far away from the forest end. That is why you should consider FSC Align for EUDR, the FSC toolkit designed to enhance your readiness to meet EUDR requirements. While the next section will share this in detail, let me very briefly introduce FSC Align for EUDR, which include three important components, which are in the middle, the FSC certification, which forms the core foundation and best starting point for responsible sourcing. And then the second component on the right-hand side, the blue one, FSC Trace, is a voluntary tool for collecting, passing on information, and very attractively submitting information to EUDR due diligence statement via EU Traces. FSC Trace will assist users generating due diligence reports later on to save all your compliance work, including information and risk assessment, for checking upon request, just in case, upon request by EU. So Andrew will run a live demonstration to show us how information collected from forest management can be passed on and transactions verified. So please don't miss that at the end of today's webinar. And on your left-hand side, FSC Regulatory Module, an add-on standard that covers specific EUDR regulatory expectations. Representatives from Preferred by Nature and SGS Hong Kong will explain this in further details, while our colleague Sean will share the experience of regulatory module early adopters, including Mr. Keelong and Jerry from Tat Win Latex, who will discuss their journey with us for practical reference. Unlike FSC Trace, which is completely voluntary, FSC Trace is completely voluntary. if you are considering using regulatory module, risk assessment, FSC risk assessment must be used in conjunction with the regulatory module. So I'm closer to end of my section. While you might think that, okay, in my previous slides showing steps how to meet EUDR requirement is already enough. Why should I also consider FSC aligned certification? I would like to highlight a few points for your consideration here. For FSC aligned certification, even though EUDR mentioned clearly that third-party certification should not substitute operators' responsibility, but information collected through this certification system can be used as part of the risk assessment. Number two, then not only does it provide an extra layer of assurance to align with EUDR, but it also demonstrates to your EU buyers that by carrying this extended and enhanced scope, you are EUDR ready and can access new markets for EUDR ready opportunities. I'm sure Keelong and Jerry from Tat Win can share more with you about market opportunities. Number three, as submitting a due diligence statement does not equal to fulfilling your EUDR due diligence requirements. Let me repeat. Submitting a due diligence statement on EU traces does not equal to fulfilling your EUDR due diligence requirements. Remember the image I show you. Because your EUDR due diligence requirement is actually more comprehensive and challenging. That is why if you consider adopting FSC regulatory module, actually, this is like taking a course or exercise that could guide you through the steps to achieve EUDR compliance. Do you get that? So number four, finally, we must understand that the country benchmarking process will be dynamic. This is clearly mentioned in EUDR. With the first review schedule for 2026. Let me repeat, country benchmarking result, like low risk, standard risk, high risk, is a dynamic process, and there will be reviews scheduled in next year. So we should remain vigilant to the potential for stricter requirements, even if your sourcing countries are currently classified as low risk. So in this context, FSC aligned certification really provides an extra layer of assurance for future readiness. Okay, so moving forward, there are steps we should begin taking now to prepare for the EUDR. For FSC cert holders, you should follow these 6 steps. Start to create your inventory list of your commodities and your products in scope, referring the EUDR Annex 1 for the relevant HS code. Review your current due diligence system against EUDR requirement. Very importantly, start to collaborate and prepare your readiness with your supply chain. Talk to your suppliers. Tell them we need to start working on EUDR. Then review your proposed requirements for FSC's new regulatory module. Plan for secure data exchange with your trading partners, upstream and downstream. And finally, you can consider reaching out to your CB, your certification body, about your intention for EUDR compliance. Over the past year, the EUDR has undergone various changes and debates. Despite all these uncertainties, including potential delay or further modification, FSC remains relevant as the global trend is shifting towards meeting stricter and stricter sustainability and legality goals to mitigate climate risks. Therefore, as a vital sourcing and manufacturing hub, the Asia-Pacific region should proactively prepare for the EUDR and any future regulations, not only EUDR today, that might arise. Okay, this is the end of my section. I hope you have a better understanding about your role and due diligence responsibility along the EUDR-ready supply chain. So next, we have the privilege of inviting representatives from certification bodies, Preferred by Nature, and SGS Hong Kong to share with us the details about FSC aligned certification for EUDR. Ms. Xinxin Zhang, Asia Pacific Regional Director of Preferred by Nature, will guide us through how to understand regulatory module, while Mr. Ken Law, EUDR Product Manager of SGS Hong Kong, will talk about audit preparation. So first of all, over to you first, Xinxin. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for having me here today. My name is Xinxin Zhang with Preferred by Nature. And I'm being assigned with the task to share with you the overview or introduction about the FSC Regulatory Module. So before dive into the detail, let me give you a very brief introduction about my organization. Preferred by Nature is an international mission-driven non-profit organization. We founded in 1994. We work in over 100 countries and maintain 29 offices worldwide. In Asian Pacific region, we have office in China, Japan, Taiwan, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, and India. Our core work is to deliver assurance services primarily through certification, eco-labels, FSC claims, play a critical role in linking responsible forestry with traders, manufacturers, and consumers. Preferred by Nature is also one of the leading organizations, both in Asian Pacific, but globally, supporting companies in achieving compliance of EUDR and now EUDR. In fact, as an official EUDR monitoring organization, we have been working in the timber legality sector in the last 10 years, and supporting responsible supply chain across more than 100 countries. And since the effective date of EUDR, May of 2023, we have organized more than 100 seminars and webinars worldwide and have developed practical toolkits to help organizations meet compliance requirements. We are Preferred by Nature among the first accredited certification body to provide FSC Regulatory Module. And we also developed assurance procedures, auditor handbook, and training programs to support company adopting it. This year, actually it's last year, 2024, April 10th, we issued the first World FSC Regulatory Module Certificate, and this year, July 26th, we issued the first FSC EUDR Module certification in China. Okay, now let's dive into the FSC Regulatory Module. So FSC Regulatory Module is, FSC actually had made systematic change to adapt its standard and assurance system and policies to EUDR. In addition to the FSC Regulatory Module, which is the additional standard requirement, FSC also published a set of supporting documents, including guidance and interpretations to help clarify requirements and ensure consistency in implementation. Additionally, FSC released the FSC Risk Assessment Framework containing 46 indicators covering environmental and social aspects, which is fully aligned with EUDR to ensure the responsible sourcing, There will be another section focusing on that, so I will not spend much time on this risk assessment framework. Another important element is introduced through advisory note. FSC has this fast-tracked some of these changes, including policy to address conversion, as well as advisory note for CUC control wood certification holders to ensure smooth integration of regulatory module. So today, my presentation will focusing on the introduction of the standard FSC Regulatory Module. Okay, so what is FSC Regulatory Module? It is a voluntary add-on module designed to support EUDR compliance. This module contains of 9 elements that provide additional requirement aligned with the regulation. It can only be applied to as an extension to existing FSC certificate, whether it's FM, COC, or controlled wood. It cannot be obtained independently. An FSC certificate must already be in place. Organization may choose whether to include all or some of their product, FSC certified product, under the regulatory module scope. And importantly, it's not limited to companies within EU. Suppliers outside EU in Asian Pacific regions may also adopt this module to ensure their product can meet the European markets, the regulations need. And FSC regulatory module is made up of 4 key components. There are additional requirement for forest management, additional requirement for controlled forest management, chain of custody and trademark, and accreditation requirement. Companies or certification holders only need to focusing on the first 3. Please be aware, certification body evaluates the conformity of the standard requirement. The ultimate decision on EUDR compliance rests with the relevant competent authority in Europe. From the next session, I will present more detail about the requirement for FM, CFM, and including group discussion and chain of custody. For both FM and CFM, controlled forest management, the additional requirements are similar and covering 7 key aspects, which are due diligence system design and maintenance, information on input material, risk assessment, risk mitigation, due diligence statement, simplified due diligence, and handling of and also the non-compliance requirement. For organizations that are not defined as operator or trader under EUDR, for example, many suppliers in our Asian Pacific region, FSC identifies the clause either not applicable or only partially applicable in this Annex 1 of the standard. And certified forest management company or unit and controlled forest management organization meet this requirement can make a new FSC claim, which is the claim looks like this in the red text. It's FSC 100% / regulatory plus or FSC CFM regulatory plus. The requirement also specifies the type of information that must be collected, such as the trade name and product type, scientific name of the species, quantity of the product, country of harvest, geolocation of the plot of land, of course with the specific rules on the plot larger than 4 hectares or lesser than 4 hectares, harvesting date and time frame, supplier details, FSC public summary report. As Michelle also shared, so there for companies, which their preconditions, companies can implement simplified due diligence when the management unit, the forest, is located in a low-risk country under EUDR according to the benchmarking information published by EU. preferred by nature, PBN, we also made a global map to outline where is low standard and high risk countries. And the risk of mixing with non-eligible input is negligible. So if your forest is in low risk country and the risk of mixing is low, in such case, certification holder need only collect basic information. No need to carry out risk assessment or risk mitigation. And if we translate this sentence into the standard, that means you no need to comply with the standard requirements section 4 and section 5. But if you don't meet the requirement or low risk country or low risk in terms of mixing, then you still need to carry out the standard due diligence, which means you need to carry out risk assessment. But FSC also provide a simplified FSC risk assessment template, which is the Annex 3 of the standard. And if you check the Annex, all the indicators in the Annex 3, only indicator 26, which is harvest or trade in product do not contribute to a violation of international human rights or is not associated with armed conflicts, is identified as not covered by FSC standard, which means for FM or CFM certification holder only need to assess indicator 26 risk. This is greatly reduce the workload. For group FM certification, all members must apply the regulatory module. Partially adoption is not allowed. Group rules must address how the requirements are implemented, and the responsibilities must be clearly assigned, and internal monitoring system must reflect the module's requirement. Let's now look at begin with review this chain of custody module, covering this additional requirement for the regulation, chain of custody additional requirement. So similar like FSC and CFM, FSC also identify clause either not applicable or only partially applicable in the Annex 1 of the COC standard for organizations that are not defined as operators or traders under EUDR, for example, many suppliers in Asian Pacific region, such as the section 12 due diligence statement, publicly available information, which is not applicable. That means most of our companies, if you are not operator or traders within EUDR in Asian Pacific, no need to anything in compliance with the section 12. It's not applicable. And organizations certified against FSC COC regulatory module can make regulatory claim or regulatory plus claim. Regulatory claim is made on sales and delivery document based on input meet the module's requirement. Including examples like FSC 100% slice regulatory or FSC mix slice regulatory. A regulatory plus claim requires a fully verified supply chain where every upstream or certification holder applies this module. This claim can only be used with FSC 100% or FSC CFM product. For example, FSC 100% regulatory plus, FSC CFM regulatory plus. And within the additional requirement, chain of custody requirement, there are requirements on management system, material sourcing, material handling, and about the segregation and the sales and compliance with timber legality legislation, product group, and also requirement from section 8 to 13 is about due diligence requirement. To support this, now we look at this management system requirement. organization must appoint a compliance officer, maintain adequate record, ensure the separate the eligible or non-eligible material, keep accurate material accounting record, and provide correct claim and due diligence information to the downstream in the supply chain. They must also have a internal audit. And unique to the product in the FSC regulatory module is necessary that the exact species, one or a combination of species, are identified. Even a list of potential species is not applicable. And when you're using the FSC Plus claim, the only controlled system that can be used is transfer system. And the only claim that may be used alongside this regulatory plus claim is FSC, either FSC 100% or FSC CFM, FSC Controlled Forest Management. On the other hand, if using the regulatory claim, the potential eligible input expand also to regulatory claim material and material that does not have a claim but is in conformity with FSC regulatory module. This latter material would be controlled by the company with FSC regulatory module. And any control system, including transfer percent and credit, may be used, and any outgoing claim may be provided with that, except FSC recycle, which is not relevant and it's not within the scope of EUDR. And companies must also establish a due diligence system covering all suppliers and sub-suppliers and review it annually and carry out internal audit. And in terms of information collection, organizations must collect information including species, geolocation, date and time range, and risk assessment, and also information about supply chain. And when collecting information of the plot of land, that shall be complemented with a reference to the respected FSC certified management unit. And also, organizations also shall have access to the information on its supply chain to the level that allow it to carry out risk assessment. If the product and the material is from CITES, then need to also accompany with a CITES license or certificate. Similar like FSC and CFM, COC company could also implement a simplified due diligence, which means only collect information, no need to carry out risk assessment and mitigation, but with a precondition, which is the material. First, the material is originated in low-risk country. That means the forest in the low-risk country, not the processing line or the mills in the low-risk country. And the forest, the FSC risk assessment design it as a negligible risk, which means low risk. And there are also no substantial concern, such as NGO report or community compliance. If all three aspects met, then the organization may be exempt from risk assessment and risk mitigation. And in this standard, that means exempt from clause 10.1 to 10.8 and section 11. If not, if you cannot meet the requirement of simplified due diligence, still need to do risk assessment. And risk assessment for COC, focusing on the risk of origin and risk of mixing. If non-negligible risks are found, companies must apply effective mitigation measures supported by policy, controls, and annual independent audit. For organizations seeking conformity with FSC regulatory module for the purpose of sourcing non-certified material as controlled, conformity with the FSC COC regulatory standard is mandatory. Actually, you can see from this standard, the section 8 to section 13 is largely reflect the requirement for due diligence system in FSC controlled wood standard, but meant to address relevant EUDR article. When carrying out risk assessment using FSC updated risk assessment framework aligned with EUDR is mandatory. Last but not least, a bit about FSC trademark requirement. So organizations can use FSC promotional statement if you're certified against the FSC regulatory module, but that can only be in the promotional materials such as report, website, or Instagram, and different claims to be used for different scenarios. For companies verified under FSC regulatory module, you can use the claim like we conduct the EUDR required due diligence for certain product with support of FSC system. Only the organizations with a fully verified supply chain may describe the product in the scope of the regulatory module with the following statement, which is we use FSC to trace to the forest back, ensure our product are deforestation free. Yeah, to conclude, FSC regulatory module is a voluntary add-on, but it provides companies with a very strong and credible framework to align with EUDR requirement. Certification body like us prefer by nature. We evaluate the conformity, but the final decision on the compliance of EUDR always rests with the relevant competent authority. Yeah, that's the overview of FSC regulatory module. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Xinxin, for the informative presentation on the FSC Regulatory Module. I would now like to invite Mr. Ken Law from SGS Hong Kong to discuss audit preparation. Ken, over to you.
Thank you, Michelle. Hello, everyone. I'm Ken Law from SGS HK, and I'm the EUDR product manager. So in this section, I will explain how to prepare for the audit of the FSC regulatory module, which includes the collection of information, risk assessment, and risk mitigation. Of course, you will hear these three items often in this webinar. And these are the three main requirements of the EUDR. Before moving forward, it is essential for the organization to determine where its products fall within the scope of the EUDR. And here are 3 steps to identify the product category that require EUDR compliance. First, check the HS code of your products. According to the EUDR FAQ question 28, if a product's HS code is listed in EUDR Annex 1, it falls under the regulation. It is also important to verify the HS code with your clients, as there can be different interpretations of product category definitions. Besides that, the organization should verify whether its products include any relevant commodities covered by the EUDR. If a product contains any relevant commodities and its HS code is listed in the EUDR Annex 1, it falls within the scope of the EUDR. Also, according to the EUDR FAQ question 32, if your product includes packaging, that packaging is subject to the requirements of the EUDR, provided it is used to support, protect, or carry another product. However, if the packaging is separate from the product during shipment, it may classify as a product and needs to comply with the EUDR. Next, I will further outline the audit preparation for FSC Regulatory Module. The FSC Regulatory Module is designed to align with the requirements of the EUDR, with a key focus on the due diligence requirements. The organization should develop a due diligence system to support EUDR compliance, including information collection, risk assessment, and risk mitigation. And here I will take a COC as an example to explain how to prepare for the audit. To set up a due diligence system, the organization shall appoint a compliance officer. This person will be responsible for ensuring that the organization meets its requirements and manage the risk of non-compliant products. This role is quite similar to that of the FSC management representative. Also, having a clear procedure can help the organization implement its due diligence system more effectively to meet the requirements of the FSC Regulatory Module. Of course, here I will not go through all the procedures you need to establish. If the organization isn't based in the EU market, some requirements may not apply directly, such as communicating with the competent authority and making information publicly available. However, the organization should still establish procedures to support their clients in complying with these requirements. So, one of the biggest challenges in complying with regulatory requirements is the collection of information. The requirement is outlined in EUDR Article 9 and FSC Regulatory Module Clause 4.9. To understand what information is needed, it can be divided into the following 4 groups: the production information, forest information, legality information, supply chain information. For production information, it can be provided either by your side, such as the production trade name, HS code, and quantity, and while some of the information will be provided by the upstream suppliers, such as the species. For forest information, mainly refer to the geolocation and the dates of time range of production. It is important to highlight that the collecting of this information is crucial. Of course, you may use different tools to collect the geolocation and the time or date or the time range of production. But please note that if you cannot obtain valid forest information like geolocation, it will be impossible to meet regulatory requirements. For legality information, according to EUDR Article 10.3, wood products that are covered by a valid FLEGT license are considered to comply with Article 3.b of the EUDR. If the supply chain does not have a valid FLEGT license, further evidence needs to be collected. And you may check the definition of relevant legislation of the country of production in EUDR Article 2.40. However, it can be quite challenging for companies to independently collect evidence of supply chain compliance with local regulations. In such case, a third-party certification plays an important role. Of course, it is important to highlight that certification or verification scheme cannot replace the obligation of EUDR compliance, but it can be used as evidence in their risk assessment. According to EUDR FAQ 5.7, certification schemes can assess supply chain members in their risk assessment, as long as the certification covers the necessary information to meet their regulatory obligations. For supply chain information, basically it refers to the details about your company and your clients, including the company name, address, and also the email address. Another challenge in complying with regulatory requirement is risk assessment. Of course, as mentioned before by Michelle, to address this challenge, FSC has developed the risk assessment framework, which serves as a comprehensive tool for companies to assess and mitigate risk associated with sourcing forest materials. It's important to note that for FSC mix or FSC control wood input materials, organizations must determine the risk of origin for each risk indicator by using the risk assessment template provided by FSC. So for more details, you may refer to the previous FSC webinar or the coming section in this FSC webinar. At last, the organization shall conduct risk mitigation if there is still non-negligible risk after the conclusion of risk assessment. Also, the organization shall implement internal audits of its DDS at least annually to ensure ongoing compliance and effectiveness. If you have any further questions regarding to the FSC Regulatory Module or the EUDR, please feel free to reach out to SGS. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you, Xinxin, again. After hearing from the CB's perspective, let's listen to what the industry has to say. Today, we have Mr. Sean Nyquist from FSC International, who will facilitate this section and share the overall experience and insights from the early adopters of the regulatory module. Sean has also invited our privileged guests from Tat Win Latex, Mr. Keelong Foo and Jerry Foo, who have successfully acquired a regulatory claim to share their first-hand insight. Sean, over to you. Hello, Sean.
Hey, just sharing my screen.
Great.
Stevie, can you turn my video on for me? Okay, thank you, Michelle. My name is Sean Nyquist. I'm the Acting Program Manager of Value Chain Development at FSC International. So good afternoon, good morning from Bonn, Germany. We launched the Early Adopter Program so that we could understand how our certificate holders of different types would be able to use our different FSC aligned for EUDR solutions, as well as give our certification bodies a chance to audit them. We selected 25 certificate holders and 4 CBs as early adopters, from whom we collected feedback on the regulatory module, the revised risk assessment framework, and we're still doing so on FSC Trace. To ensure we had a diverse portfolio of certificate holders, we recruited 14 companies from across solid wood, 5 companies from fiber, and 6 companies from natural rubber value chains. We have forest managers and primary processors located at or near the start of the supply chain. We have manufacturers and traders importing materials into Europe. We have companies, both big and small, sourcing from large forests and from smallholders across all regions of the world in the early adopter program. The process was straightforward. Our multidisciplinary team had a series of one-on-one meetings with each of these companies to brief them on both the regulatory module and FSC Trace. We conducted interviews, we collected surveys. For the regulatory module, we had a few of the companies do a mock audit, which is essentially a dry run before doing an official audit, so that our certification bodies in the program could also test the regulatory module's auditability. For FSC Trace, we have done one-on-one onboarding, everything from granting access, logging in, adding products, trading partners, entering inventory data, and eventually matching transactions with trading partners so that the data can be passed from the forest down the supply chain. Now, after working with these 25 companies, I will share with you 5 practical takeaways regarding the regulatory module and risk assessment framework. Because later Andrew will be talking about FSC Trace, I'll let him show you some of, show you through demo how that works. Now back to this. Number 1, the base claim sets the approach. The regulatory module is not a standalone claim, as others from Preferred by Nature have already talked about, but it's rather added onto whichever base claim a certificate holder already has, such as either FSC 100%, FSC mixed credit, or controlled wood. Sourcing FSC 100% means that the wood or rubber is exclusively coming from forest certified to FSC's forest management standards, and that the material is kept physically segregated throughout the supply chain, so that we know that a robust and consistent mechanism exists to mitigate risks both of origin and of mixing. To maintain FSC 100% claim can be challenging, but if it can be done, then the expansion of scope to the regulatory module claim is a lot easier. Of the companies that have obtained the regulatory module so far, 93% of the certificate holders rely on the FSC 100% claim exclusively. Now that leads to practical takeaway number 2. Not all risk assessments are created equally. There are 3 ways that an FSC risk assessment is done according to the latest risk assessment framework revision. First, the simplified risk assessment, then the company-led standard risk assessment, and last, the national risk assessment. For those doing FSC 100%, they can use the simplified risk assessment template created by FSC International, which shows how 47 of the 48 relevant indicators of origin are addressed by FSC's forest management standard. For the early adopters that do not exclusively source from certified forests, there are 2 other scenarios. In case there is already a national risk assessment available for a given country, then they need to use this. The role of the company then is to define their sourcing area and to utilize the prescribed mitigation measures in that national risk assessment. However, in the case that an NRA is not available in a given country, as it was for many early adopters because it was so early in the launch of the new risk assessment framework, then it is up to the company to create their own. Most national risk assessments were not available during the early adopter program, and we had observed that most companies who source FSC mix or controlled wood preferred to wait until FSC completed the national risk assessment rather than creating their own. That leads to takeaway number 3. A company's role in the due diligence is largely defined by their position in the supply chain. Companies upstream, whether they are forest managers, traders at the forest gate, or primary processors, are on the front line, so to speak, of collecting information and carrying out measures to assess and mitigate risk. However, it is the responsibility of the downstream operators to collect this information and ensure its credibility and robustness. For downstream companies with many long supply chains, who are sourcing from dozens of different countries, this responsibility of assessing the credibility and robustness of the information can feel too complex and overwhelming. However, operators using FSC aligned for EUDR, we observed from the early adopter program, can at least rely on a structured and consistent approach to define how risk assessments by their suppliers are done in each country based on the national risk assessments or the use of FSC 100%. And the information is more credible due to the third-party verification by a certification body. That leads to takeaway number 4. A multi-pronged approach is needed with some CBs. If you're interested to use the regulatory module, then the first thing you should do is check whether your CB is accredited already by ASI and has auditors trained and ready for it in your next audit. And you should ask your suppliers to check with their CBs. If the CBs are not yet accredited, then you and your suppliers should let them know early on that you are interested to get the regulatory module claim. Depending on how this progresses, consider engaging with your local FSC national team. The fifth and final takeaway is that the EUDR does not exist in a vacuum. Some companies have asked, what is the value of FSC beyond EUDR? There are already a couple of regulations in the EU, and there are new ones on the horizon, such as CSRD, Green Claims Directive, Empowering Consumers Directive, and new due diligence regulations that could sprout up from different regions. And in all of these cases, the value of a credible third-party certification is unparalleled. And that is just on the regulatory front. Where many corporations are seeing the value in sourcing FSC relates to their brand, not only as a layer of protection, but as a means for brand enhancement. But now you've heard enough from me. Now I would like to hand it over to one of our early adopters. Keelong, Jerry, with great pleasure, I hand you the floor. Stop sharing my screen.
Hi, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. This is Jerry here. So just a brief start to our sharing. So over the past 3 years, we have dedicated ourselves to understanding the real challenges faced in our industry. This has not been a solitary effort. We have listened carefully, gathering feedbacks from as many stakeholders as possible, which includes farmers, traders, processors, manufacturers, regulators, and buyers. Each voice has been critical in helping us identify our gaps, refine solutions, and move closer to a system that works in practice, not just on paper. At Tat Win, we supply natural rubber latex that is essential for a wide range of products, from medical gloves and garments to sportswear, footwear, mattresses, household products, condoms, and many more. The diversity of applications show how our material is essential across multiple industries worldwide. As a company, we supply directly to EU operators while also supplying midstream manufacturers who produce finished goods for the European markets. This dual role gives us a unique perspective. We see firsthand the pressures and constant constraints faced at the production level. At the same time, we understand the demand for transparency and compliance required by EU operators. This position gives us both responsibility and opportunity. So given these challenges, we set about identifying the best solutions available to tackle compliance. This is why we have been working closely with the FSC team through the early adopter program to align, test, and fine-tune against the real-world challenges we encounter on the ground. By implementing the FSC Regulatory Module and FSC Trace, we are not only strengthening our own system, but also helping to shape a framework that is practical, credible, and scalable for the wider industry. This collaboration ensures that compliance is not just a box-ticking exercise, but a process that genuinely reflects the realities of productions, trade, and delivery into Europe and worldwide.
Yeah. So going on, I'm Keelong from Tat Win. Next slide. Yeah. So going on to the next slide, navigating EUDR as a natural rubber latex supplier. In reality, according to the EUDR, the obligation lies upon the EU operator to conduct the three main activities, which is the information collection, risk assessment, and risk mitigation. However, what I would like to speak about is, in reality, as a supplier, we are much closer to the source of the forest plots, and that's why most of the responsibility actually lies upon us as a supplier to provide reliable information in the first step of information gathering. So within the early adopter program for the FSC alignment for EUDR, we were able to establish a full supply chain, meaning that our FSC FM plantations, our collection center, processor as a Tat Win, the EU operator were all together in the early adopter program, allowing us to test, allowing us to give feedback, and allowing us to learn from the entire process through the entire exercise. And even though Thailand, because we are sourcing mainly from Thailand, Thailand is has been classified as a low risk country. In reality, we were only required to do a simplified risk assessment. We are only required to submit the information. However, in practice, because the EU operators are ultimately liable, and like Michelle has mentioned, the country risk classification is dynamic. So in practice, the EU, our buyers in the EU still require us to conduct those full risk assessment, and that's why we decided to choose FSC as the best solution in order to tackle this challenge. So why do we choose FSC in terms of the main tool that we have to tackle EUDR? Firstly, even though we are very well aware that the EUDR has stated very clearly there is no green lane, there is no certification that has been approved or is endorsed by EUDR. However, from our reading of the regulation, it is very clear. Third-party certification, reliable third-party oversight is more credible and more enforceable than self-declaration or internal audit. FSC standard is also globally recognized, and it has already been trusted by regulators, buyers, certification bodies for already non-EUDR regulations for paper products, timber products, and wood products. And most importantly for us, the key part of EUDR is in order to prove that as a processor, as part of the supply chain, we were able to prove non-mixing of non-compliant material. So that chain of custody certification is key for us. In that, the chain of custody allows us to ensure that at every point of the chain, the detailed information about the flow, the in and outs are all well documented and recorded. And the FSC Trace and the regulatory module is actually continuously evolving. as we get more and more updates on the EUDR requirement. So that is actually key. And this also provides additional assurance that we are in line with the EUDR. And finally, most important for buyers, when you're considering different kind of solutions that your suppliers have considered for EUDR, there is a hidden risk that us as a supplier have identified. There is a risk of data duplication. Some suppliers may knowingly or unknowingly reuse forestry data for using uncertified materials. The very basis of the third-party oversight at every chain of the custody for FSC supply chain makes such practices detectable and preventable. Most importantly, it's able to mitigate it to a very, very low or negligible extent. And finally, the bigger picture, it allows us to gain trust and credibility with our buyers in the supply chain. We are also able to communicate how we conducted the due diligence with the regulators, the competent authority, and our stakeholders, as we were presenting a very transparent and auditable system. Finally, I want to end off. I know this is a lot for everyone participating in this. Likewise, we're just like you. We have been on this journey for 3 years. We are still learning. We are still doing our best to ensure that the solutions, the tools that we're using are the best available. And ultimately, what we have understood from the entire experience is not that we are compiling a set of documents to comply to ensure that the customer or the competent authority is satisfied. Ultimately, the best manner to approach the EUDR is really building and developing a due diligence system within your supply chain that is robust and verifiable. And that's why we chose FSC. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Keelong and Jerry and Sean. I think all the information is very useful, practical. And before we move on to the next section, maybe I would like to take a few questions, okay? I would like to ask Jerry and Keelong, because I collect some questions actually before the webinar through the registration form. So the question is, what are the key challenges and strategies for maintaining market access? Any intel?
That's a very good question, Michelle. Thank you for the question. I think one of the biggest question for non-FSC buyers, because they are not very familiar with the way the FSC works. And with FSC, you can actually access the FSC public dashboard in the website for your relevant product. For ours is natural rubber, which is under the N7 category. You can just access the public dashboard. You can filter according to the commodity. You can filter according to the country that you want to source from, which in our case is Thailand. And you can see a list of the suppliers or the certificate holders that are valid and their status, and you can actually contact them directly. Their address and contact details are there. So this makes it very accessible for a buyer seeking to work with a FSC supplier. In many cases, your current supplier may already have been certified or in the process of being certified. This is for the demand side. And for the supply side, we are likewise also looking for buyers in terms of market access. We also look into the FSC public dashboard to look out for our downstream manufacturers. It could be a glove manufacturer, it could be a mattress manufacturer or a balloon manufacturer. And that's where we find our buyers and we communicate to them.
Thank you, Keelong. I think, all you mentioned is very useful. So for those who have some experience with the FSC dashboard, Power BI, it is a very useful platform. But if not aware of that, maybe we can include some of the useful link and materials in reply to the emails for you. But Sean, do you have anything to add regarding, market access?
No, I think what Jerry and Keelong already mentioned makes sense, and I would just build on the point that really there are a lot of there are so many companies out there that will do the due diligence according to their interpretation, and I would just encourage companies to consider looking for consistency, and that's something that I think companies can get by following the FSC certification.
Great, thank you. Once again, thank you, Sean, Keelong, and Jerry. I think I still have 1 minute for one more question before I invite Dinda to share his risk assessment part. So may I invite Xinxin to come back? Xinxin, are you there? Can you come back? Maybe not, because I've received a couple of questions regarding Chinese enterprise. So maybe I will keep the question and share with everyone later. All right, so thank you so much. This is a wonderful section for us to listen more about the practical feedback from the industry. So I hope our audience now has a deeper understanding of how the FSC regulatory module can enhance your readiness for the EUDR market. Moving forward, we are reaching a more advanced level as we dive deeper into the context of a risk assessment. While the EUDR focuses on assessing and mitigating the risk of including non-compliant materials in our supply chain, how can we achieve this? Most of us have limited experience with risk assessment, except for companies sourcing wood near the forest site. Therefore, let's take some time to learn step by step, from the principles of risk assessment to how to use the various FSC templates to navigate your risk assessment compliance journey. We have Dinda Trisnadi from FSC International to share with us this important session. Dinda, are you ready? Over to you. You are muted.
Okay.
You are mute. Okay.
Yes. Is it okay now? Thank you, Michelle. Okay. So my presentation is about FSC risk assessment. I'm sure that all of you has been repeatedly hear about FSC risk assessment. So I will explain more about this one. Okay, so when we are talking about risk assessment, please remember this slide. So what is risk assessment? So risk assessment is part of due diligence system. This is a system of measure and procedure to minimize the risk of sourcing material from unacceptable sources. There are three parts of due diligence system, which is the first is collecting information based on each indicator. The second is assessment of information. This will then lead to the designation of whether the risk is negligible or non-negligible. If it is negligible, then it means that the material is acceptable. But for non-negligible, then it means that the material is not acceptable. And then when the risk assessment identify the risk as non-negligible, then we need to create mitigation measure. Why? We need to create mitigation measure to ensure that non-negligible is not accepted in the supply chain, and only those that negligible will be accepted in the supply chain. So as mentioned by Ken and also by Sean, that not all risk assessment is how do you call it, reliable. So that's why FSC developed the risk assessment framework, or the code is FSC PRO 60006B. So why we FSC developed this procedure, it is to ensure that the risk assessment is uniform and robust requirement for assessing risk of sourcing material from supply area. And then, based on this framework, FSC create FSC risk assessment that assess the risk of sourcing material from supply area and establishes mitigation measure to address those identified risks. Okay, so in the current FSC procedure, there are 64 indicators that can be divided into 12, we call it indicator category, which is land use and management, taxes and fees, third parties right, trade and transport, corruption and or data and document falsification, management activities, environmental protection, due diligence or due care, conservation and forest degradation, health and safety, human labor rights, HCV or high conservation values, and GMO or genetically modified organism. So FSC risk assessment will assess the risk of sourcing material from supply areas. Supply areas mean where the material is sources, and then establish mitigation measure to address the identified risk. And then FSC risk assessment already aligned with FSC policy on conversion and EUDR requirement. Okay, so there are, as I mentioned, there are 64 total indicators. So that seems a lot, right? But actually, from the 64 total criteria, 57 is actually like a development or extension from the previously 32 indicators. And then there are 5 criteria developed newly to align with FSC policy to address conversion and EUDR, and then 2 indicator to hold FSC value, which is environment and workers' health. Okay. So for FSC risk assessment, if we want to develop, when we are developing FSC risk assessment, there are 3 steps, which is the first, not step, but actually element. So there are elements. The first is determine the scope, gather and assess information, determine the geopolitical scale and source type, designate risk, and then establish mitigation measure. This seems to be a lot, right? So let's review one by one. So determine the scope. It will seem simple because this is where you need to specify the product under your assessment, whether it's timber, anti-FP, or etc. And then the second is specify the area covered by the assessment, whether you want to whether the area covering a country, a region, a province, or a sub-district. So what are the specific area is covered by the assessment? So this is in case if you want to develop your own FSC risk assessment. But currently FSC is developing specific risk assessment for each countries, and then the scope will be covering the whole countries. I will speak more on that later on. So this is the information that need to be filled out when we are determining the scope for risk assessment. So this is for Romania. So far, FSC already have one published risk assessment, which is Romania. So I'm using the risk assessment that already available for public, which is Romania. So the geographical scope is Romania. And then the subnational, they do not have subnational because in some countries there are subnational, which is province or states, because maybe in that provinces or states there are some different legislation that may affect the risk assessment, or some countries use ecoregion, for example, like Indonesia, because there are differences in legislation for each for several ecoregions. Then, as I mentioned, commodities impacted. So for this one, this is all product derived from trees except reclaimed material, meaning that it cover the logs and also NTFP coming from trees. And then the indicator coverage is all indicator, meaning 64 indicator are covered. And then the second is gather and assess information. So what are we expected from this one? So we are expected that in this section, the not only about legislation that is gathered, but also sources from experts, stakeholder, NGOs, journal, study, news will be used when you are gathering and assess information. So it is expected that you do not only use like a single source of information. So this is the example of how information is gathered. So this is the long description of issue. So this is mentioned. This is for indicator about corruption. So the first is the information from international NGO, Transparency International, and then there are also regulation about corruption, general index. So there are many source of information used. So this is the reference. So there are Forest Guard Territorial Office, EUDR, and then there are many legislation used, and then description of legal requirements. So it is expected that you do not only use single source of information. And then in some cases where there are no sufficient information, or there are doubt, or there are some conflicting information, then you may have to use expert opinion. And then this is the geopolitical scale that I already mentioned. Whether you want to use national or subnational, so it is depend on how we are, how the scale will be used. Now, as I mentioned, this is the geopolitical scale and source type for Romania. They are using the whole country, and then this is for Indonesia. This is so they are dividing the subnational based on ecoregion, which is ecoregion Sumatra and ecoregion Java and Bali. And then designating the risk. So based on that, the information that you gather, there will be information that you need to consider and comparing it with the risk threshold set up by the FSC Pro 60006B. Because, for example, like maybe there are some violation, but then the threshold said, is it widespread or not? Then if it's not widespread, then it can still be negligible. But in some indicators, it is require very high level. For example, like if there is a violation and then threatening the HECV, for example, then it cannot be considered as negligible. It should go to non-negligible, and then the risk mitigation need to be created. So negligible risk, it means that in the event that evidence indicates that non-negligible risk threshold are not exceeded, then there is no other information that would lead to non-negligible risk designation. And then the non-negligible mean in the event that available means of verification do not show evidence that the negligible risk category is applicable, then there are no, and or that one or more specific risk areas were identified and then not applicable. For example, like the example of the extension of the previously 32 indicators into 64 is that, for example, now the extension is the first is that legal legislation requirement is meeting is met by the forest manager, and then related to the protection of environment. And then the second is that the forest manager do not have negative impact on the protection of environment. So there are two. The first is based on whether the legislation are met or whether there are actual negative impact was detected on the ground. So if, for example, like there is no legislation about threshold for protection of environment, then for that indicator can be marked as not applicable. But then the assessment for the if there is negative impact on the protection of environment, then it should be assessed. And then establish mitigation measure. Mitigation measure shall be established according to each risk and source type identified. Meaning that maybe, for example, like in one province, the risk is negligible, but then in other province, it can be non-negligible. And then mitigation measures shall be created for that provinces with non-negligible risk. And then, for example, like maybe for the natural forest, the risk is non-negligible. The private forest, the risk can be negligible. Then for the natural forest, risk mitigation measure shall be created. Okay, so this is an example from Romania. So the risk mitigation measure shall be divided into type of verifier. In this case, in the screen, I show you this is a type of verifier for others. The mitigation requirement level is recommended. Recommended means that if you have better or more effective risk mitigation measure, then you can use your own risk mitigation measure. But if you do not have better or more effective risk mitigation measure, then you can use what's recommended in the risk mitigation in the FSC risk assessment. So this is the example of mitigation measure for type of verifier, either which is conduct interview with supplier staff to identify actual or perceived cases of corruption. So this indicator is about corruption. And then if credible information is disclosed, require the supplier to conduct an internal investigation, take corrective action. For example, like staff disciplinary measure, improve internal control, and submit a written report with supporting evidence. Follow up through additional interview or audit to verify that mitigation measure were implemented effectively. And then as mentioned by Xinxin, Ken, and Sean, please make sure that if you are sourcing from standard or high risk, and then you have recommended recommended risk mitigation measure, and then you conducted it, please ensure that you document everything that you have done and what is the result, whether it is implemented effectively or there are still need some improvement to do. This is another example of type of verifier database verification. This is recommended, and then the other one is different type of verifier, which is other. Let me show it to you. The first is the first from the database verifier is that review report of control conducted by the forest authority and police to identify any irregularity, sanction, or evidence, checking risk area designation issued by forest authority and then the police to confirm whether the sourcing location has been associated with elevated risk of corruption or weak enforcement. And then the very type of verifier other, provide training and awareness session. So as you can see, for one indicator, there may be 3 risk mitigation measure, 3 recommended risk mitigation measure. Then you can choose whether you want to use 1 or 3 of the recommended risk mitigation measure. So just make sure that whatever risk mitigation measure you choose, you have to prove it that it is effective to ensure that the risk is negligible. Now, as I mentioned before, that there are changes in the risk mitigation measure procedure, and then there are already 60 countries with the already have risk mitigation measure, but FSC now in the current process to renew the risk assessment from 32 indicator to 64 indicators. So this is the list of countries with the previous risk assessment. And then for the Asia and Pacific, this is the list of the countries and then the schedule for developing the risk assessment. Now, this is also the slide that are already presented by the previous colleague. So what is the role of risk mitigation, risk assessment? So previously, risk assessment is only used for a certificate holder that want to source control material to be processed into control wood. But now with the EUDR, we are using it for forest management, chain of custody, and COC control wood. And then why FSC risk assessment will help the process with the EUDR? Because if a country already have approved FSC risk assessment, then it means that all certificate holder can use that FSC risk assessment to do their due diligence system. Remember that due diligence system consists of 3 parts: collect information, risk assessment, and then risk mitigation measure. If the country already have FSC risk assessment, then the burden for the certificate holder will be lessened because the risk assessment already done, the mitigation measure already provided, then you only need to implement the mitigation measure. So if the country do not have FSC approved risk assessment, then the certificate holder need to develop extended company risk assessment, meaning that they have to develop a full FSC risk assessment by themselves. Okay, as mentioned by Xinxin, Ken, and also Zhang, there are 3 types of risk assessment. The first is simplified risk assessment. This is for FSC forest management and chain of custody that using FSC 100%, and then they need to confirm with the FSC Regulatory Module. The second is the FSC risk assessment, which is developed by FSC based on a specific country or region. And then the third is extended company risk assessment for use by certificate holder that want to meet FSC Regulatory Module and or source FSC control wood where an FSC risk assessment does not yet exist. Okay, so what happened with the certificate holder in countries that do not have FSC risk assessment? Then, as I mentioned, they need to develop extended company risk assessment. For certificate holder in countries that not yet have FSC risk assessment that not yet updated, then for FSC controlled user, they can still use the old FSC risk assessment. But for control root user that want to align with the regulatory module, then unfortunately they need to develop extended company risk assessment. And then for the country with low risk, according to the EU benchmarking, then as mentioned by the previous presentation, they only need to use the simplified due diligence statement. So what's the conclusion? So the benefit of a risk assessment is efficient and up to date because it's already aligned with the EUDR, reduce the burden for the conducting risk assessment, efficiently assess and mitigate risk, updated regularly based on feedback and changes in legislation, clear and comprehensive, transparent and inclusive. Why? Because there is a public dashboard. It goes through consultation and feedback. And emerging risk can be captured via the public risk hub. So FSC has created a risk hub where the risk assessment for each countries can be viewed, and then any feedback can be sent via this risk hub. I will show it to you later. Okay, so Sean and Ken already mentioned about how the supply chain can be complicated. So this is illustration of how a supply chain can be very complicated, right? So when we are talking about risk assessment, so who need to do the risk assessment? So the risk assessment need to do by everyone in the supply chains, but as Sean mentioned, the role of each organization in the supply chain will be different. For the primary processing that directly sourcing forest products, so they need to do the risk assessment. Well, while actually the requirement is fall to the operator according to the EUDR regulation, but the operator can ask information for everyone and on the supply chains. So basically, they are going to ask for the primary processing to do the risk assessment for the forest, while the other in the supply chains need to do risk assessment whether there are risks for mixing the EUDR compliant product with the non-conformance or those with high risk. Okay, so as mentioned before, there are simplified risk assessment and then there are standard risk assessment. So this is the template for the simplified risk assessment. So this, I'm sure that everyone already familiar with this one. The information of operator or trader, the country, certificate code, geolocation of plot of land, harvesting date or time of range of harvesting, link to FSC public summary report, and then buyer, operator, or trader, the name, post address, and email address. And then the product sold, type of product, trade name, wood species, common name, wood species, scientific name, and then what is the quantity. And then this is the part where the risk assessment per indicator will be conducted. So first for the, this is an example because there are 64 indicators, so I only cover this one. Land tenure rights are secured and registered according to legal requirement. And then the default risk conclusion is negligible risk. And then what is the short description of risk? And then here it is referred to criterion 1.2. So as explained before in the previous slide, simplified risk assessment is for when you are sourcing FSC 100%. So you can ask the forest, the supply area, for them to give you the the audit report, or ask them to fill in this section with the audit report, with the FSC FM audit report. For this one, this is about criteria 1.2. So they can just copy and paste the audit report into this one. And then please ensure that not every audit can go smoothly. Some non-conformity may be identified. So if there is non-conformity identified, then the risk conclusion should be changed from the default negligible risk into non-negligible risk. And then if it is non-negligible risk, then this section will be automatically generated where you need to define what is the mitigation measure type, whether document verification, web page verification, stakeholder consultation, field verification, scientific testing by certified, do not buy, no mitigation measure identified, or other. And then what is the risk mitigation measure? So what, for example, like maybe for the indicator 1.2 about land tenures right, you are sourcing from the natural forest, and then there is finding from the FSC FM audit that the land tenures right, the permit from the government will be expired within 1 year, right? And then what is the risk mitigation strategy? So maybe you can put that the proposal for extending the permit to the government have been sent, and then acknowledgement from the government receiving the proposal is available. So it means that the forest already apply for extending their permit. So that's example of the risk mitigation strategy. And then for the extended company risk assessment, it means that they need to comply, they need to develop the full FSC risk assessment by the company themselves. So there are 4 parts that they need to follow, the part 4 until part 7. So part 7 is about general requirement. The scope of description is already mentioned in the previous slides. And then assessing risk, determining the scope, gathering information, source type, and then designation of risk, and then establishment of mitigation. And then indicator about specific requirements. So there are specific requirements that need specific instruction available in the FSC Pro 60006B, because FSC think that this is of high importance, and then it need to have specific guidance on how to assess the risk about the high conservation value, forest conversion and degradation, and then genetically modified organism. And then the 7 is indicator for risk assessment. So as I mentioned, there are risk category, there are 12 risk category, land use management, taxes, and etc. up to the genetically modified organism that need to be filled in by certificate holder that need to develop extended company risk assessment. So this is the FSC risk assessment template. If you want to develop extended company risk assessment, there are several tabs, because the template is using Excel file, there are several tabs. The first is country overview, supply chain and transparency, geopolitical scale, source type, reference, expert. So these are, if you want to, you need to list the reference where you gather your information, and then the reference need to meet all of this requirement. Expert as well. So this is the information that need to be filled out, the legislation, and then the risk mitigation measure, and then risk mitigation documents. What is risk mitigation documents? So if the risk mitigation measure mentioned that, okay, you have to check for the, for example, like the concession license, then the concession license need to be listed in the risk mitigation documents. What is the full title? What is, when the date is required? When is the date not longer valid, etc. So this is the information that need to be filled in. So you can see that it is burdensome to create extended risk assessment, and it is much easier to use FSC risk assessment. And then hopefully uh, the EUDR will be postponed another year, so we can have like a more countries in Asia Pacific to has FSC risk assessment completed. So if you want to know what are the 64 indicators, so here they are. So this is the number in the procedure 6000B, the indicator, relevant criteria in the applicable forest stewardship standard, and then part where it is required by the EUDR. So the criterion here means that the information should be available on the FSC FM audit report on the criterion 1.2. And then 1.3 for land management rights, taxes and fees, as I mentioned. And then what are these in the yellow? So for those that highlighted with yellow, it means that it is applicable for FSC risk assessment and also for the extended company risk assessment. The simplified risk assessment are those that are not highlighted by yellow. So even though there are many indicators, but for simplified risk assessment, since the information already available in the FSC FM audit report, so it will be easier compared to creating the FSC risk assessment by creating the extended company risk assessment. So as you can see, there are a lot of indicators about human and labor's right. And then also the third party, the third party is for the indigenous people, traditional, and also traditional people. They have their own specific indicators here. Trade and trade and transport, due diligence care, conversion and forest degradation. As I mentioned, this is one of the highlight in the EUDR. So you have to remember that the cut-off date is no conversion from natural forest and no transformation of plantation to agricultural since 31 December 2020. So yeah, and then this is about high conservation value on, and then the last is for GMO. And then let's go to the risk hub. So in the risk hub, you will find that this is the website. As I mentioned earlier, there are only one country that already have complete the FSC risk assessment, which is for Romania. So if you can see, there are tabs here. The first one is the map of the country. And then what is the risk detail? You can see for the land tenure site, the risk is negligible. For land management rights, negligible. So, and then what are the risk mitigation measures? So you can see here that there are a lot of documents that can be used for the risk mitigation measure. Okay, so you can see that how many negligible risks. So they have like a 45 negligible risks, 45 indicator have negligible risk, 16 indicator have non-negligible risk, and then there are 5 indicators with not applicable risk. So if you want to check what are the indicator that have non-negligible risk, so you can just sort it out here. And then this is the first, so this is, as I show it to you in my slide, this is for the corruption. And then this is the risk mitigation measure. And then the measure types other, as I mentioned in my presentation. And then the next is for database verification. This is the mitigation measure. And then the document that need to be verified is GF verification record. And then, yeah, you can actually play with this FSC Trace Hub. So if you want to provide feedback, so you can just choose it here, the feedback, and then you can type what is your feedback. Maybe perhaps you think that, oh, the mitigation measure is not effective, and you have more effective mitigation measure, you can provide your feedback here. Or if you do not agree that the mitigation measure is non-negligible, it should be not negligible, so you can also provide your feedback there on that link. So yeah, thank you very much for your attention. I return the floor to Michelle. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Dinda. Please don't go, because we have one question for you regarding risk assessment. Yeah, the question is, how will EU check the harvesting map? Because we are using different kinds of map to identify the plots of land geolocation. So how do you know how will EU check the map?
Okay, so EUDR is requesting for geolocation for the supply area, right? So the geolocation need to be as exact as possible. So that's why they are asking 6-digit behind comma. So that pretty much accurate. And then how they check whether there are deforestation or degradation. So in the EU, they have Earth observation that are using various satellite imagery. So they will plot the geolocation provided into this map, so they can see whether the area of the supply is coming from deforestation and degradation or not. And then per cut-off date 30 December 2020. So yeah, that's how they will check deforestation and degradation, Michelle.
Thank you, Dinda. All right. Thanks, everyone. I hope you are following along and learning from Dinda how to use the simplified risk assessment template, the updated risk assessment, and the risk assessment framework to assess your risks and conduct the due diligence requirement. We now come to the demonstration of FSC Trace, the groundbreaking tool designed to facilitate the universal EUDR requirement of submitting the due diligence statement and the required information to EU traces. Let me share my screen and introduce our speaker. So after sharing a few slides, Andrew, after sharing a few slides, he will conduct a live demonstration on how to collect and pass on information from upstream to downstream in our supply chain. So I suggest you not to miss this important session. So without further ado, may I invite Mr. Andrew Williams from FSC International to share with us. Andrew, over to you.
Hi, Michelle. Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. So I'm here to introduce you to FSC Trace. So as Michelle says, I'll go through the slides first, and I'll try and give you a live demonstration. So basically, there's 4 components to EUDR compliance, which you've been taken through in the webinar. We're talking about FSC Trace, which is the 4th component, which builds on the risk assessment management framework and also the regulatory module. So let's move forward. So essentially, FSC Trace, as I say, builds on the regulatory module, and basically you'll be able to upload all the compliance documentation that you may have worked on hard in terms of making sure that you've mitigated your risks, and you can assure your customers that you're risk-free or risk mitigated. So FSC Trace is built on blockchain, and the blockchain is basically like a double bookkeeping system that's immutable. So it means that a transaction can't happen until both trading partners, the upstream and downstream trading partners, agree on the details of that transaction. So each of those trading partners has secure independent access to the system and to that ledger. Basically, unless they agree on the transaction and it's written to the blockchain, I apologize, sorry, I have a very sensitive mouse, it won't go through and won't be written to the system. So the system itself is fully encrypted, and we've just completed something called a penetration test, which makes sure that it's fully secure. And there's professional companies that spend their time trying to hack systems to test whether they're secure, and we have passed those tests. And then another point to make here is that every single certificate holder who uses FSC Trace, they alone have access to their data on the system. And no one else who's using the system can see their data unless they actively share it with a third party, either who's using the system or a third party who they want to send that data to who's not using the system. Moving on. So just to summarize, FSC is based on permissioned ledgers. They're private ledgers. It's completely secure. All parties along the supply chain have access to FSC Trace and can have access to the transaction details that are being passed down the supply chain securely. A key aspect to FSC Trace is it's built on being able to upload information from the FSC Risk Hub, and it also it will be able to compare the polygons that you upload with a certified area submission tool that may have been discussed earlier. And lastly, and importantly, is that it has a real-time access to FSC certificate database. So every single trade is verified. And so you can't trade with a certificate holder whose certificate has been suspended or terminated. And then lastly, because it's aligned with the regulatory module and the COC standard, it's also aligned with the EUDR regulations. And we'll show you how that applies. So just to quickly go through the supply chain, we just wanted to do a very simplified supply chain. I know that many supply chains are far more complex, but this just serves as a demonstration. So essentially, you can have 2 suppliers in different forests with different geolocations and different species. with different volumes and weights of the products that they're selling from the forest. And then the system can track independently those two different supply lines. So here we're talking about a timber supply chain going into a sawmill. And you will note that the volume and weight declined slightly. So we're tracking volume and weight throughout the supply chain. And there is basically mass volume tracking in terms of, so there's always accountability in terms of conversion of products from product A to product B in this case. And then here you'll see that it's combined, those two products are combined in a factory, and then there's a manufacturing process all the way down to the wholesale and retailer, and the system will track that. And again, you can see that the volume and weight is continuing to climb as the product becomes increasingly finished. So what is the FSC's EUDR tech ecosystem? So FSC Trace is a core central part of that system. As I said, we basically integrate with the database on certificates, products and species that each certificate holder are licensed to sell and to trade in. We also have a document library where you can upload all your due diligence documents. That library can be fed by country risk assessments, or in addition to supporting documents that you may need to support the country risk assessment. In addition, we have a harvesting registry where you can upload harvesting blocks, and you can view those harvesting blocks in the harvesting registry. In the future, there'll be integration with a certified area submittal tool, and this serves really to ensure that the harvesting blocks you're uploading are indeed are contained within the certified area that you have submitted to the certified area submittal tool. And I think currently this is a voluntary situation, but I think down the line that may change. Just to be clear that the certified area submission tool is that the data you upload to it, you can either choose to make it public, or you can choose to retain it as private information only viewable to you. And then the outputs from the system are due diligence statements that are automatically compiled as a result of the supply chain. And then what we call something called a due diligence data briefcase. So the due diligence data briefcase contains all the due diligence documents that the due diligence statement basically you're saying that the due diligence statement you're compliant, and then the competent authority may come along and ask you to demonstrate that. So here you can see that we have an automated link to EU Traces. So you can automatically submit your due diligence statements to EU Traces. And here you can basically share in an automated manner any information that a competent authority may request of you of a transaction that's previously been made. So returning to the supply chain, this is your kind of simplified supply chain. So the supply chain is outside the EU, and then it goes into the EU. So then you have the EU's basically information system, which is EU Traces NT, where all the due diligence statements are contained. And then the system will basically enable the importing certificate holder to make automated submissions into EU Traces. And then the due diligence submission numbers and also validation numbers can also then be passed in FSC Trace down to your customers so that your customers have the corresponding due diligence statement number as well as the validation number. In addition, the system will shortly be able to automatically compile and pass down the supply chain, all the due diligence documentation. So that could be your risk assessment, it could include export permits, it could include any invoices or other additional information that is required to support the the product that you're selling in compliance with the EUDR regulation. So then basically certificate holders in the EU may be approached by EU member competent authorities for access to the due diligence briefcase information that supports every single due diligence statement that is submitted to EU Trace's NT. So the way we do this is by the certificate holder who's using FSC Trace providing a one-time shareable link that will contain any information that the EU member competent authority requires of the certificate holder in relation to the transactions that they're interested in. So this brings us up onto basically how do users interact with FSC Trace. So we have three ways of interacting with FSC Trace. The first is through direct entry. So it's just like you're entering information onto a form on the website, and we'll show you that shortly. The second is bulk uploads. So here we use pre-formatted Excel templates that you can upload up to about 1,000 transactions or records at a time. So this means that if you have many suppliers or customers, you can upload all those details in a very expedited manner. In addition, if you have a lot of purchases or sales that are coming off your ERP or other invoicing system, you can also pre-prepare Excel templates and upload those into the system. And there's a wizard that enables you to cross-check that all the information you're uploading is accurate and corresponds to the information already in the system as regards to your trading partners and the products and species that you're licensed to trade in. And finally, for perhaps larger companies who are using, for example, SAP systems or equivalent, we have an API interface. The current situation with that API interface is it's operational. It's a core set of APIs, and we're working to release a kind of a much more comprehensive set of APIs in the next month. So I'd say 4 to 8 weeks, depending on how quickly we're able to wrap our platform on that. And users will be able to basically have a self-service pathway to being able to gain access to the credentials that you require in order to be able to access the API. So in terms of data sharing, we really want to make sure that we are as interoperable as possible with third parties. So as a user, you can basically choose what you want to share, both within FSC Trace with your trading partners, both upstream and downstream. And that can include risk assessments and mitigating actions. It can also include transaction data as well. And then you can also basically decide what you want to share. So we have a permissions-based system so that if you're sharing documents, for example, downstream, the downstream trading partner, your immediate trading partner, you may want them to see all the contents of the documents, for example, the invoice, and also the polygon area, and any other information. And so they will be able to access that documentation, but then their trading partners will not be able to access that information. But they will be able to see metadata about what that document is without seeing the details of that document. And this is important because it means that upstream users can share documentation with confidence downstream, knowing that their commercial interests are being safeguarded. And at the same time, when it comes to the EU and being able to provide EU competent authorities with access to documentation, there's a means for being able to do so that the EU competent authorities will be able to basically approach the document owner and say, we want to see these documents. We see them on the system and we would like access rights. And then that means that the owner of the document can then explicitly share the confidential details of that document with the competent authority at their request. And finally, we also, in terms of document sharing within the system, we also basically we can set expiry dates for how long we want to share that document for. And then once the document sharing period has expired, the user will then have to request for an extension of that period. Again, it's trying to safeguard your interests as an upstream user. So some of the benefits of using FSC Trace. Essentially, for every single transaction, you can be sure that your trading partner is basically the certificate remains valid. We also will be able shortly to enable you to have automated COC reporting. So it means on your transactions, you can be able to do volume summaries, species lists, all sorts of filtered printouts of your trading that will be of interest and use, for example, particularly when doing audits. You can attach any documentation you want with any transaction, and this will become increasingly automated so that you can select sets of documentation already preset for specific sets of transactions or specific customers. So it really speeds up your ability to manage the documentation with your trading. Again, we have easy data sharing. I think I've discussed that. And then all the due diligence is basically very easy to manage downstream in terms of submission to the EU Traces system, as well as to the competent authorities. And in that regard, FSC has a 10-year data retention period, and that far exceeds the EU basically standard of data retention of 5 years. So it means that if you do a trade today, it could be the case in 2 years' time, an EU competent authority comes and requests that information, and you can be confident that you'll be able to relatively easily and quickly pin down the information that they're requesting. So going forward, currently FSC Trace is entirely voluntary, so we welcome you to use it. Now I'll talk about release timelines. The core features, which basically enable you to use the system completely normally as a certificate holder, are free and will likely remain free. There will be some premium features that are particularly of use for large operators, such as operators wanting to use the API interface for high volumes of transactions. And the reason why we would be wanting to charge this is basically to cover the costs of those types of operations, because they exert an undue burden on the cost base for everybody else. And then it is likely that perhaps in Q1 next year, we will be introducing a channel for non-certified FSC products, but only for certificate holders. So it means that if you're a certificate holder and you trade both FSC certified and non-FSC certified products, you'll be able to trade both simultaneously in the system, but in separate channels. We have yet to confirm that, but we will confirm it in the next couple of months that it's happening or not. And then in addition, we continue to work on interoperability and really improving our API platform, as well as worked examples of how to use our API. And we hope that there'll be kind of a community of folks who've developed the connectors to key ERP systems, and that we can, share that information and that work with other FSC certificate holders. So forthcoming features, I'd like to apologize and say that we are a little bit behind the curve in terms of multilingual interface, but that will be forthcoming in the next, probably within a month, and certainly perhaps even earlier. Secondly is our automated compilation of documentation and geospatial data. We're working on that feature right now. We are behind, but it will be coming again, I'd say in the next 6 to 8 weeks. Shareable links. This is where you want to share, for example, transaction and document data with a competent authority or with an auditor, or with a customer who's not using FSC Trace. So that feature will be coming before the end of the year. It's a critical feature, very important. And then likewise, chain of custody report auto compilation, that's also in the pipeline before the end of the year. And then two other features that are a little bit further out. One is basically more advanced modeling and handling of manufacturing processes, in particular continuous processing, and also the ability to have multi-stage manufacturing chains simulated in the system so that you can track your products from your feedstock through to your output products. And then the last, as I've mentioned, is a channel for non-certified materials for FSC license holders. So that's the presentation. I don't know, Michelle, do you want to stop here for questions or should I continue?
Okay, it will be good to take one question. I think there's a quick question asking you that he is a FSC CH. Does he need to apply another account for FSC Trace?
No, so I should have mentioned that basically FSC Trace will be available in the coming about 6 weeks to all FSC certificate holders, and all they need is to basically initiate their electronic trade license agreement with their CB. So, and the reason for that is we just need them to have a log on to FSC Connect. And as soon as they have a log on to FSC Connect, they can either apply for access to FSC Trace through an online form that we'll publish, or they may even be directly invited, particularly if they're trading with an upstream partner who already is using FSC Trace.
Okay. Another question is about cost. Does FSC charge a fee for each FSC Trace transaction?
No. So FSC Trace will be free for at least a year. And I think what will happen is we'll be reviewing basically the costs of running FSC Trace. I think the kind of aim is to keep FSC Trace free for all reasonable use scenarios for certificate holders for the foreseeable future.
Great. If you allow me to ask one more question, the question is, how does FSC Trace work in a sense that the geolocation is precise enough to align with the EUDR online platform, online portal, I think EU Traces?
Okay, so this is a good point. So the requirement for EUDR is essentially that it's supposed to be the geo coordinate is supposed to be six figure geo coordinate, and it's a 6 decimal precision that applies, and it's laid out in the EUDR regulation. FSC does not provide an app or any software for certificate holders to collect that information, but there are apps online, both for example, if you want to use your phone, you can use Apple iOS or Android apps that are available to collect that information directly and then to basically upload those polygons into FSC Trace.
Great, thank you. So over to you, Andrew, to kickstart the live demonstration.
Thanks. So I apologize. It may take a while just to quickly reload the FSC Trace because it times out. So what we're going to do is we're going to start an FM level, and I'm just going to conduct some simple trades going down from FM to sawmill down to basically a manufacturer, and we'll look how to do that. We'll also try and look at a bulk upload, and then we'll quickly look at the EUDR ledger. So usually you click on here. So I'm using a test system. So this is not the live system. The live system is live. and there's about 150, 200 users that have been invited onto the system, FM users currently. Because it's a test system, things are slightly different. So normally you'd click, can you see my screen? Yes, you can. Yeah. So
Yes.
you normally click on this FSC Trace logo here, and it'll take you in. Currently, because it's a test system, we're testing some issues out. So we're just using this cheap hotspot here to load the system. And then what happens is it takes you to this interstitial screen. And so, for example, if you were a group, part of a group certificate, you might see, and you were the group manager, you might see as many members of your members who have an account signed up to FSC Trace on here, and then you could be able to select the appropriate account. So, but here, because it's not a group account, you can just select a single certificate. It takes a little while to load, but then once it's loaded, it's reasonably fast. And the reason why it takes a while to load is there's a lot of data and information to download from the server. So I'll take you for a quick drive around the app, and then we can look at doing some a quick trade. So this is you basically. I hope the screen is sufficiently legible. Basically, this is the dashboard, which would be your normal go-to landing page. On the left, you have some useful shortcuts. The actual dashboard, being able to record a trade, viewing all your transaction logs, and then also looking at your user profile. And across the top, we have basically 4 key menus. We have a menu to basically be able to configure your products and also look at your product inventory, your trades. So then configuring your trading partners. This is for, we won't look at this today, but this is essentially for being able to model manufacturing or processing within your company. So if you're processing timber or latex, or whatever it is that you're processing, this is for modeling your inputs and outputs. And then purchase transactions. Here you'll see there's 2 options. One is single upload. So this is direct screen interface, which we'll look at, and then also block uploads. And similarly then the same for sales transactions. And then the last menu item here is validate trades. So this is when you basically have incoming sales, for example, that your upstream vendor have basically put in the ledger, and they come into your ledger, and then you can review those trades and match them to say, yes, I agree with that trade, and I'm matching it. And then the third menu is data. So here we have the document library where you would basically store all your documents. And the documents you can manage through tags. Secondly is harvesting sites. So here you can look at all the harvesting blocks as an FM that you might have access to, and also view them on a map. And then this is sharing data. So this data sharing currently is essentially for sharing data across the system, across users who are using the system from your account. And then you can also request data from your upstream trading partners as you want, and you can do so in regards to specific transactions. And then lastly is managing data sharing. So if you want to rescind data sharing or change the expiry date of data changing of data sharing or cancel the expiry date, you can do things like that. And lastly, we have this analytics menu. So this analytics menu right now is quite short, but will be growing over time to include other features. So currently we just have a regulatory compliance for the European Union, but one would hope that in the future you might have that for other trading blocks as well. Right, so then your user profile, let's go to that quickly. So in here you can set your user preferences. So really this is, it'll give you the date and time of the system the date and time that the system is using, and this is in relation to where you're registered certificate holder. And then in addition, you can set what your preferred volume and weight units are. So the EUDR prefers weight, so there's something to be careful about when you're submitting due diligence statements to the EUDR, that they are in weight. But you can also have both throughout FSC Trace, so you can then have both running at the same time. But when you're doing reports, you may want to say, I prefer my reports coming out in weight. And then here below, we'll take a look at this later a little bit, is basically your login and API key for certificate holders who are basically making submissions to EUDR traces of their due diligence statements. Right. So what we'll do now, with any luck, is we'll go and do a sales transaction. So a sales transaction, essentially, you can select your trading partner. So essentially, here you can invite trading partners. Quickly jump there quickly, and you can add a trading partner. And then the system will automatically look up a trading partner. So I happen to have a certificate code here, and I'll search. So now it's querying the FSC database, and you can see that it's found the trading partner. But because I've already invited that trading partner, it's told me that it's already this certificate holder is already a trading partner of mine. So this gives you real-time access to FSC certificate database. And then when you're doing a trade, excuse me, keep having a pop-up menu. When you're doing a trade, if the trading partner's certificate has expired, or they've been suspended or even terminated, it will give you a warning. So here I can, put in, so the sales document ID is basically the invoice number, or sales notice that you want to, sales note you want to put in. I'm just going to make up something. And then here the system works. You can't basically everything works in retrospective. So that means that you are basically entering transactions into the system after the fact that they've actually been entered into your own ERP or equivalent system. And the system will then automatically bring up the product that you are licensed to trade in against your certificate for the sale. And it identifies what that product is. Here we have the HS code already entered in and the species. And this information you enter in here when you configure your products. And then you tell the system whether the product, you're selling the product, buying the product, or doing both of the product. And then here we can enter in the quantity, and it automatically fills in the volume here because it knows what the volume for each unit is. And then here is basically an area for telling the system that you would like to register this transaction to EUDR traces. But because we haven't filled in the API credentials, it won't let us. But if you filled in the API credentials, you could do so. And then here you can select a harvesting block. So that's a harvesting block in, and then you select the harvest date. So I'm going to do it a while back. Let's go back to this long harvest. Apologize. There it goes. Or alternatively, you can upload a GeoJSON. So you can upload a new harvesting block. So here we go. We know that we're in Indonesia. So we'll upload that. And it should, with any luck. So we're currently only using OpenStreetMaps. This may improve in due course when we have access to satellite-based imagery that's affordable. And then what we do here is we just enter the details of the harvesting block. So it means that you can basically here track in your own records, information about the harvesting blocks. So you can keep track of everything. So now the system's writing to the server just to with the information. So that's why it takes a short period of time. So there we go. So we'll use that harvesting block. And the system automatically reads the number of polygons in the harvesting block. So you have a multi-polygon harvesting block, it'll read out the number of polygons, so you can cross-check what you're expecting to see versus what actually is in the system. And then the add user-defined data is that if there is any data that you need to add that's custom data, then you type in the description, so custom data description, and then the actual value. And then here you can upload a document into your document library. So here I'm going to basically add a country risk assessment demonstration, and then I would enter country risk assessment. I'd select a date, so I'm going to say it's valid from the beginning. This is entirely fictitious, so please don't take this seriously. So it's valid for 1 year, and then you enter the version number, so you can keep track of the different version numbers, and it's going to be in English at the moment. And then you can add permission. So here I'm going to say that it's a public document, so it means that all my trading partners downstream can essentially see the document and download it because it's a publicly accessible document. And then there is a small oversight here. We don't have a tag for risk assessment. That will be improved very shortly. And now it's uploading and associating that document with that particular transaction. Shortly forthcoming is that we will have things called document templates where you can assemble, basically, it's like a folder of documents that you can have on standby, and you can literally associate that folder of documents with a specific customer or sets of customers or transactions. So then it makes the workflow a lot quicker, even for this type of manual work. And I'm going through the manual process because it means you can see what's happening. So we are missing something here. So it won't let you trade until you have all the detail in, and it's the FSC claim type. So we're saying it's FSC 100%, but it could be FSC mixed credit or controlled wood. And then you submit the transaction. Okay, so this is the transaction here. You see it's unmatched the data transaction. Your trading partner ID, which we'll go to very shortly, invoice, and it's a sale. Excuse me a second. And it's a debit of 100 cubic meters. All right, so now what we'll do is we'll go down downstream, next downstream trading partner. You give me a second. I'll have to stop sharing this and move to the next screen. So here we're going to, again, sign into FSC Trace as a downstream trading partner now. So here you go. This is a sawmill. My apologies. You completely logged out. So we have quite a tight timeout for security reasons in the system. So on you go to your dashboard, which is you log on, and you'll see waiting here under unmatched transactions is the transaction that we just created upstream. And it's telling us that the system's waiting for us to basically do something with this transaction, which is to match it. So then essentially we don't make it fully automated on this visual interaction, because we want to make sure that you agree. So we ask you to fill in one thing, which is to confirm the product that basically you are buying, and everything else remains the same. So here you can see that the country risk assessments come through because it's public, and you'd be able to download it. Right, what else is missing? Something strange is going on. Batch ID. So let's put in the batch there. I'm hoping that's correct. Excuse me for a second. Let's just go with that. No, there we go. All right, it's working perfectly until, here it goes. Right, my apologies. We forgot to enter the quantity, which is 100. And there you go. And you can see it's 100, so it's 100, and it's worked out the volume automatically because it knows what the volume is. And the transaction has been submitted successfully. And it takes a little while for the server to update because the jobs are all queued, but literally within a second or two, it should, I refresh the screen, it should come through as matched. It's taking a while longer than it should do. There you go. So now it's, when it says active, it means that it's matched. You can see this, there's a blockchain ref ID here. So basically the transaction has been written to the blockchain with this hash code here. And then this forms the transaction number for all subsequent records of trading with this particular trade. So this is how you basically do trading between upstream and downstream trading. So what I can do now is that we can do a bulk purchase, just to show you how that works. So you go to bulk uploads, and then here you can download the template that you are looking for. And here you can upload the template once you've filled it in. So I'm just going to show you that template quickly so you can have a look. Excuse me. Okay, sorry, disappearing the screen. So this is the sort of contents of a template, and the templates, we have multiple templates for specific use cases, and you're always guided through on FSC Trace which template to use when you're using either bulk upload for your products, bulk upload for your trading partners, bulk upload for your sales, purchases, and also processing manufacturing runs. Today we'll just keep it straightforward with a bulk purchase. So on the first tab are instructions about how to use the template. And then here you have the upload data, which you enter. So for example, if you make a mistake, so I'm going to write some garbage in here and do this. Oh, that's not what should happen. It should tell me it's an error. So if I do this here, for example, or that, strangely, for some reason, the template is not behaving. I'm wondering why. It should throw up an error, and I'm not quite sure why it's not throwing up an error. Anyway, so the template should throw up an error, and that's all basically, there you go. So it basically throws up this logic to control whether you can see there's an error or not. For some reason, it's not quite working right now. I'm not quite sure why. It was working previously, but my luck, it's not right now. But anyway, so you fill in this information. You can do up to 1,000 lines of transaction data, and then you can basically upload this. So we'll upload this template right now. There you go. Here's one I prepared earlier. So it uploads it and basically it parses it to make sure that the data makes sense. And so it's saying that the file has been validated successfully. So now you can upload supporting documents here that cover the entire 4 valid transactions, or in a subsequent step, you can basically upload documents for specific transactions that you want to associate with. So you'll see that there's 3 valid lines and 1 line of bad data. So if you click on the bad data, you can then go in and take a look at why is this data wrong? And essentially, it looked up the product code against the products that you have on your system that you are selling, and there was a mismatch here. So now I can correct that very quickly because it suggested the correction. And then essentially I save it. And now we have 4 valid lines and 0 lines of bad data. So now we can scroll down and we can continue. So now what will happen is that you'll see in the transactions log in about probably about 20-30 seconds, you'll have an additional 4 lines above this active coming in on the system. It may take a little while to come in. We're still optimizing the system. So the system is this system currently, as it is a demo system, is running on limited server resources, but the main production system will basically be resourced so that the system runs at an efficient manner in relation to the number of users using the system. So that's why there's a difference here. There you go. So there you see the 4 unmatched transactions that we just uploaded coming in. So then if you wanted to match them, we'd go back upstream because we uploaded the purchases, and then the vendor would then say, yes, I sold you those transactions, and yes, I'm matching them. And then on our screen, we'd see them change to active. Okay, so I'm going to skip ahead. Does anybody have questions? Perhaps that's useful to ask now. Michelle?
Yep, I am looking at the question right now. Seems like everything is good. I got one comment that with so much data, the system doesn't crash even after being used for a long time? I don't know whether this is a question or compliment or observation. So Andrew, as the father of the system,
well,
any
just
comment?
explain. Yeah, well, so this is actually a real concern of ours, and so the system is based on Microsoft Azure, and Microsoft Azure basically runs like major corporations, Oracle, Netflix, just to name two off the top of my head, who are handling millions of users with huge quantities of data. In fact, it even runs OpenAI. So you can begin to understand the level of data that Microsoft Azure can support. So we're reasonably confident that the system will be able to handle vast amounts of data, and we'll be working to optimize its scaling over the course of time in terms of the number of users coming on and the amount of volumes of transactions going through the system.
Thank you.
And then lastly, so in terms of sharing data, let me just quickly show you document library because I've not shown you document library. So here is your document library. We will be developing this to become more feature rich over the coming months, so that you will likely have folders. You can see the tags here, and you can be able to sort by tags as well. And then in terms of the harvesting sites, a similar type of approach. Again, this site is actually, I think, in Malaysia. I'm cheating a bit, if I'm not mistaken. No, it's Indonesia. My apologies. Right. So that's and you can download the GeoJSON if you want. So that's the harvesting site. This is basic. So this is still an MVP, but we will be adding additional features in relation to also what we get in terms of feedback from users. And then in terms of sharing data, so this is how we begin to share data. So here, let's see what happens if we do this. So here's basically a transaction, and we want to share the data. We can share it with this user. We can select what we want to share. In fact, none of these things we have to hand, as far as I know, but we do have this. And then here, basically, we can give them permissions to on-share the document with other users or not. And then we can select an expiry date. That's interesting. Okay, right now. My apologies. So this sets the expiry date by which then the sharing will stop. Oh, excuse me, what's going on here? Sorry, my apologies. Let's try again. That's better. And then we can select the document. Continue. So that will be shared downstream with a manufacturer. So we'll go to that manufacturer right now by moving to a different browser. All right, we're suffering from some timeouts here. I'll have to log back in.
So Andrew, while we're waiting for the screen, I just got another question about how can we assure that data storage systems are fully secure and no information leakage or disclosure will happen?
Yeah, so that's actually a really important question, and we're very concerned about that. So we literally earlier this month we hired a service provider to try and hack our system. And they spent a week running all sorts of procedures that are known, hacking procedures for trying to test the system and how resilient it was to hacking. And basically, there were one or two minor issues of concern, which we have since corrected. But overall, the system is basically secure and very difficult to hack. And we will continue to make sure that that the system is secure. It's a critical concern.
Great. And will FSC consider opening FSC Trace in the future for non-FSC clients?
That hasn't yet been decided. So that's something that I think senior management will have to review and discuss next year. The first priority is to open up FSC Trace to FSC license holders who are trading non-FSC certified materials.
And Andrew, just an interesting question. Can we use Google Map to acquire GeoJSON location information?
My understanding is you can't use Google Maps to do that. Google Maps doesn't have that functionality. There are other apps that do. So I wouldn't say Google Maps was a good choice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Right. So let's see what we have here. I want to see if the data share came through. I can't remember where I shared it to. Let's just see. Oh, yes, it's come through. So there you go. So then you can see the data that's been shared with you by your vendor. So there's the country risk assessment that was shared directly with us. So then you should be able to download it here. So that's a demonstration of basically downstream data sharing. And then I don't think we have the. Oh, we do. Okay. So here, this is basically, we have two transactions here that have been tagged with for being submitted to EUDR traces. So we can take a quick look at that format. So essentially, this is the format that has been prescribed by the EU. So this is a simplified version. There's only one commodity. And you can see where it's come from. Its producer is Malaysia, and it gives you a polygon. You should be able to view that polygon. There's the coordinates, and you can view it on the map. There you go. Right in a national park, perfect. So that shouldn't be the case. And then the HS code, the system always focuses on the net mass being imported, and it says import sale. Oh, this is an export actually. So this is actually incorrect. This is our developer just testing. So this would be, if you're importing to the EU, this would be an import. And again, this should be interesting. Okay. Oh, I know. Oh, yes, I know why. It's because this is a test record, and it's actually not entirely correct. But this at least is the format that you'd see on your DDS preview. And then at the moment, you then basically say that you wanted to submit this to the EUDR. This is working in the main system, live system. It is not working. This is a test system, And we've just pushed a new version to the system, and this feature at this point is not working, but it will be working by the end of today. So it'll say error submitting DDS, unfortunately. We had wanted to show you that, but we can't. But then you'll be able to see that record posted on the EUDR Traces NT on your account. And then you'll see that if you go to the user profile, you can see that the EUDR username and API key have been entered. So, Michelle, I think that's about all I have to show today. I'm sorry that I can't show you a functioning EUDR because I'm using a test system that was broken last night, but will be fixed later today.
No problem, Andrew. Thank you so much. I think we have seen a lot of the interface, which is new to us, and it is a really good opportunity to let us have an understanding how the interface look like. So thank you very much. I think we all of us should stay tuned for the update and maybe the news about releasing time and functionality, things like that. So about to wrap up. Thank you, Andrew, again for sharing the informative and practical information that is relevant to all of us. This is a first ever exclusive demonstration in the Asia Pacific. So as you all know, FSC is a robust certification system, has the mission to protect the world's forests in the fight of climate change and biodiversity loss through market forces, supply chain, traceability, and integrity, while also securing data accuracy and security. So with that, FSC Trace is the go-to technology we will heavily rely on in the near future. Once again, thank you, Andrew. And then please allow me to also thank all our speakers again for enhancing our understanding and facilitating our EUDR-ready journey in the market. So in the essence of time, even though we have collected more questions, we have answered some in the Q&A chat box. So once again, thank you for supporting FSC and sustainable forest management. Together, let us protect our forests through our joint effort in driving sustainable forestry supply chain. And my colleague have one more piece of information to share with you. Yep. Okay. So as you can see, we show a QR code on the screen. If you want to learn more about Asia Pacific event and you want to follow more about our news, please scan the QR code or email us if you have any questions or comments related to EUDR. With that, once again, thank you for your time. I wish you all a nice day. See you next time. Bye-bye.